In this video, I'm going to explain to you the scales or the levels of measurement. And we need to know about this because the levels of measurement dictate what specific measure of central tendency might make the most sense. That's not the only thing that dictates what measure of central tendency we will want to use, but it is an important thing, and it also affects all the other ways in which we analyze and handle our data that we have. So measurement is the assignment of values to outcomes following a set of rules. So we have all of these pieces of information floating out there, or these actions people are taking, these characteristics that people vary on. And as social scientists, we want to measure those characteristics. And we use these different sets of rules in order to do so that we can analyze our data and we can make sense of them and generate knowledge from the different pieces of information we gained. So there are four levels of measurement that we'll talk about today. We have nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. So the nominal level of measurement is defined as having characteristics of an outcome that fit into one and only one class or category. So these are like groups that we're putting people into, and these groups are mutually exclusive as we are measuring them. So we may ask someone in a survey to report potentially their biological sex or their political affiliation. And importantly here, let's think about political affiliation or political ideology. Political ideology may be very complex. Maybe you have some areas in which you affiliate with the conservatives and some areas where you feel a little more affiliation with the Democrats, and you have all these thoughts and ideas. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is how we're measuring someone's political affiliation. So I give you a survey and you say, I affiliate as a conservative or I affiliate as a Democrat. So we're putting these categories or these buckets with the names on them. And then we also have ordinal level of measurement. This is the next most complex form of measurement. So here, characteristics that we're measuring have a logical order. They have some order in which that makes sense that people, if you were asking them to order these levels of measurement that we were asking people to report on, they would have a order that it would go in. So if you had rankings for a job, ranking candidates for a job, you may have your first choice, your second choice, your third choice, your fourth choice. Or if you said, what's your class level? You know, freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior. There's a logical order in which those different categories exist. So we have names here still, like the nominal level of measurement, but now we have a logical order, whereas there is no logical order for political affiliation. There is no order for Democrat, conservative, and independent. They're all just categories floating around. There is an order for freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. So it's the ordinal level of measurement. It has order. Then we have interval level of measurement, which is a little more complex than ordinal level. So with each increasing level, we're adding these additional levels of complexity to it. So with interval level of measurement, there's a continuum, an underlying continuum that has equal spaces or intervals along the scale, almost as if we have a measuring tape or something with inches equally spaced out, that each additional inch is the same as every other inch, and there's an increasing number of length, for instance. But here, the thing that we're measuring doesn't have a meaningful 0 point. So it wouldn't make sense to say there's a 0 point of an interval level variable. An example of this is IQ. When we measure IQ, we don't have a 0 level that makes sense. You can have low IQ, you can have high IQ. Importantly, each point on an IQ scale is equally measured out. 100 is higher than 99, which is higher than 98, which is higher than 97 at equal spacings. But there is no zero IQ with this form of measurement. Then when we go to the ratio level of measurement, we have all the other components of the previous 3 levels, but now we have a meaningful 0 point. So it would make sense to say that there is a 0 value for a ratio level of measurement. The ratio level is less common in the social sciences, but it still occurs. So here we would be saying that if we're measuring cups of coffee each day, for example, you could have 0 amounts of coffee. I could say I had 0 amounts of coffee today, and I would be very sad, and I would have a horrible, horrible headache and probably be very cranky, but I could nonetheless say I had no cups of coffee today. Or I could say I had 10 cups of coffee and I gotta go lay down. So, but again, we have these equal spacings where 0 8-ounce cups of coffee is less than 1 8-ounce cup of coffee, which is less than 2 8-ounce cup of coffee, 3, 4, and so on. Those are equal spacings, but now we can say I have had no cups of coffee, and that makes logical sense with what we're measuring. So that's the ratio level of measurement. And so here is a visual depiction of what we're talking about here in terms of these added levels of complexity as we go from nominal to ratio. So with nominal, we just have names. Eye color, for example. There's no logical order of eye color, and there aren't equal spacings of differences with eye color. It's just these categories that exist. When we have ordinal, then we introduce the logical ordering. But we don't have the equal spacings. We don't have the meaningful 0 point. We just have order. Hierarchy in an organization. If you have your CEO at the top of the organization, you have your supervisor at the bottom, and everybody in between with different levels of amount of hierarchy depending on how giant and crazy your organization is. Or if you're like my buddy and you work at a startup, maybe there's not really much of a hierarchy. There's the CEO and everybody else, and nobody knows what the hierarchy is, and everybody else thinks they're each other's bosses, and they're all kind of just, bopping around. That might be maybe a nominal instead of an ordinal organizational structure, because there isn't really much of an order if you're working at a startup. Everybody is just sort of floating around. In any case, so then you have interval, where we are still naming the amounts and the different categories of the variable. Usually we're talking about numbers though. So we have 1, 2, 3, IQ, you have 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 100. So they're named with numbers, and there is a natural order, numerically, and then we have these equal spaces in between the levels of measurement for that variable. So for this, we have a vocab test score. You can't have no vocab ability if we're measuring it within a vocab test score. You could get, if you were measuring how many vocab words a person knows, maybe somebody scores 0, but that doesn't mean they have 0 vocab ability. It's just an arbitrary 0. That just means they have a very low vocab ability, but it doesn't mean there's an absence of something. Okay, so then when we get into ratio, there can be an absence of something. So it's named with numbers, there's an order to it, we have the equal intervals in between the different levels, but now we can have nothing. So maybe you have no debt if you're very lucky, or you have $100,000 worth of debt if you're less lucky, or you own a home or something. I don't know. But you can have no amount of debt. You can have a 0 amount of debt. It makes sense when we're measuring debt. All right, so now let's think about it. What is the type or the level of measurement for these different variables here? We've got COVID-19 infection rates per capita. We could say per capita country or per capita something else, but let's call it country. So let's think about it. How would we measure that? We could say we have 1% in COVID infection, 2% in COVID infection, 3% COVID infection. So, okay, we know there's numbers involved and they're equally spaced. So that takes out ordinal and that takes out nominal. Can we have no COVID infection? Would it make sense to have an absence of COVID-19? Yes, it does, because we used to have an absence of COVID-19. Right? So you can have no COVID-19. Probably nobody does, except for maybe New Zealand. They're out there hanging out with their kiwi fruit and their sheep, having a good time with not that much COVID infection. They probably still have some, but you can have zero COVID-19 infection. In fact, we all did before the pandemic. All right, so what about marital status? Are there equally, what would a marital status be? We'd have single, we could have divorced, we could have married, let's say. Is there an ordering of, are there equal intervals of marital status? Is it, an equal spacing from single to married, married to divorce, or something like that? No, there isn't. Is there an order to marital status? Is there a logical order for marital status? No. It's not single is above married or below divorce. There's no logical ordering to marital status. So we just have the named groups that people can belong into. And these would be mutually exclusive groups. So we have nominal. We would measure them as mutually exclusive groups. What about number of siblings? Is there an equal space interval for number of siblings? 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 siblings, a very, very big family. Okay, so we know there are equal intervals. One sibling is more than 0 siblings, so okay, we know we can have 0. That leaves us with one answer, which is ratio. Now, what about military rank? Are there equal? We know there's rank, so that gives us some information, but you have rank order for ordinal, interval, and ratio. All of those have rank order. So we need to decide, are there equal spacing intervals between different ranks in the military? No, not really. There's just a rank, kind of like the hierarchy of the organization, unless you work at a startup and there is no hierarchy at an organization. So military rank, you have an ordinal variable, and you kind of get a little clue there because it's called rank, but then you don't have those equal spacings. All right, what about reaction time? What if I'm some sadistic researcher who likes to poke people with a stick and measure how long it takes for them to say ow? That's what I'm studying. We would probably measure it in seconds. Okay, so we have seconds. We know that each second is equally spaced apart from each other second. Can you have, if you're measuring reaction time, can you have an absence of reaction time if you're measuring participants? No, not really. There's no absence of reaction. If you're measuring reaction time, maybe it's really, really slow like me, and it takes, really long time to figure out what's going on. I get poked with a stick from this mean researcher, and it takes me, an embarrassingly long amount of time to go, ow! Or you're, very, very fast, very agile person, and you smack the stick out of the person's hand with lightning speed, but you wouldn't have an absence of reaction time. There was going to be a reaction. It doesn't make sense to have no reaction in that context with that kind of measurement. So then we're talking about interval. There is no meaningful absence. There's no meaningful 0. Now, it gets a little trickier here when we're talking about survey items. This is the kind of thing that we would often use in the social sciences. So you've probably all taken surveys at this point in time and maybe seen something a little bit similar to this, maybe not this exact thing, but let's say you're taking a survey that says, please indicate the degree to which you agree or you disagree with the following statement. And then this item comes from the religiosity scale that measures how religious a person is. So the statement says, I believe that God exists. And then you have to answer if you strongly disagree or strongly agree with this statement. So what is this level of measurement here for this variable? Well, okay, so it's named. That doesn't take anything out for us because they're all named. do these have, so we know it's ordinal, we know it's interval or ratio, but do these have equally spaced intervals that make sense, like inches on a ruler? Not really. Do we know that neither disagree nor agree is that, if this is 1, 2, 3, is that, higher than strongly disagree? Yeah, kind of, because we're measuring equality, but these are sort of these buckets that they have a logical order, like an ordinal variable, but do they have these clear numeric distinctions? Not really. So technically, survey items are ordinal variables. But the problem with this is that if we say it's an ordinal variable, then we can't do a lot of the statistics that we want to do. Because you can't really take a mean of an ordinal variable, because what would the mean of, let's say you're talking about the freshman, sophomore, you're talking about class rank. What's the mean class rank? The average class rank. That doesn't really make sense. You could look at the most often class rank, or you could even look at the median. But you couldn't take the mean, and then you couldn't do all these statistics that we want to do. So what do we do as social scientists? We assign a number to these response options, and then we just treat it like it's an interval variable. Then we say, yep, these are all equally spaced apart on these numbers, like inches on a ruler. And now we can take the mean, and now we can do all these, statistics that we want to do. So it's a convention that we have that's not perfect, it's not technically correct, but it allows us to run our quantitative analyses. It's an approximation. We're saying, yeah, we're going to just say strongly disagree. It's an approximately, we know it's less, let's say it's equally less than disagree on this characteristic of religiosity. And neither disagree nor agree is in the middle of this characteristic, and strongly agree is the highest, and we're just going to pretend like these are actually equally spaced apart. So if we see scale items like you see in your labs and the other things that we come up with in the class, we're treating it like an interval scale. So it's technically not correct, but that's what we got. All right, so that is levels of measurement.